Wow, that was a really, really powerful film, Shaunak. I think people are going to need to take a moment to process. I don't know how you process, such a visceral film. So we've got some time now for discussion, and I'd like to introduce our panelists. So on my left, Dr. Sushrit Jadhav, who's a senior lecturer in cross-cultural psychiatry at UCL. There's also a consultant psychiatrist who works in homeless outreach in Camden and Islington. Shaunak, who I've already introduced you to, who's the director of Cities of Sleep, who's a filmmaker but also an academic and visual artist. Ian Bangay, who I haven't met yet, hi Ian, who manages an outreach service in central London and is employed by Change Grow Live, which is a health and social care charity, and has over 20 years experience of working with the homeless in London in a variety of settings, including hostels and specialist units, as well as on the streets. And then Deborah Garvey, who's Senior Policy Officer at Shelter. And Shelter, as I'm sure many of you know, is a charity campaigning to end homelessness and poor housing in the UK. So we've got people here who really know the subject of homelessness from a practitioner perspective, as well as policy and kind of academic perspectives as well. So just to start off with, it's a stunning film, and I think deals with two very difficult things. One is homelessness and poverty, and that's a difficult subject for a filmmaker, but also darkness and the night. I was wondering whether we could just start by asking Shaunak to tell us a bit more about why you made this film and how you made the film, why you chose to focus on these particular places and stories.
Right. So the genesis of the film happened, I think at an incipient level it happened with my own personal relationship with sleep. I've long struggled with insomnia, and it's been the bane of my life since I was very young. So I think at a basic level, an interest in grappling with sleep through an intellectual or philosophical lens came from there. So it started with me just doing casual visits to different night shelters and different informal sleep settlements in Delhi. And as one starts making friends there, one gets nudged towards the broader informal settlements like Jamal's here. I think the film, in all earnestness, began only with me meeting Shakeel, which is an interesting story. So usually the method that we deploy is that whenever I go to a place, I take really long vetting interviews with people, where I'm just asking them about their lives and whether they'd be interested in working with us and ascertaining whether we think of them as interesting subjects. So while I was doing these interviews at Meena Bazaar, this is the place that Shakeel lives, one of my assistant directors came up to me and said that there's this one guy who's going on hovering around the area of the shoot and saying that I'll tell you things that nobody else will. So obviously I'll say, why don't we call him in front of the camera? And within 10 minutes of the conversation with him, three things became clear. Firstly, that he's a classic unreliable narrator. So he keeps shifting stories, he'll start off by saying something about his family and after that change the story again, which to my mind always makes for a richer canvas within a film. If the main perspective, the optic through which you see the world is foundationally unreliable, I think it makes a richer kind of a texture. Secondly, if you got the bit where he says that he's actually not Muslim. He's Hindu, but he's changed his religion because in order to find safe sleeping spots in that area, it's easier if you're Muslim because there's a mosque nearby and that's the charitable institution that supports. And thirdly, that even within the shadow economy that Meena Bazaar was, even there he inhabited the bottommost rung. Even there he was the fringe. So again, the perspective of the outsider is always a richer vantage point than the perspective of somebody who's long been embedded in the field. So instead of going with somebody who slept in that area and slept rough in that area for really long, it made sense to talk to somebody who has an elementally conflicted relationship with Jamal. So it's only once we started meeting him that I decided that he's going to be the main vector and I'm just going to follow him. But he was also a serial vanisher. So every 3 months he would just vanish. And till about 2 years post the shoot, I was extremely worried that I didn't have a film at all. So Loha Pull, the Iron Bridge, came up almost as a kind of background, like a backup, so that I would have something. And I think the film is richer for its presence. But that's how the film actually began, with my meeting Shakeel.
And since the film has been released, have you been surprised, or what kind of reactions have you had in showing it in terms of generating provocation or conversation around homelessness in Delhi?
Do you mean the screenings in Delhi? Or generally across the world? I don't know if I can pin it down to, I've shown it various different contexts, ranging from students to architects to lawyers working on the Beggary Act in India, to social workers, to a general audience. So of course it's a extremely variegated sort of terrain. There are, in my head, I usually distinguish it between bleeding heart responses, engaged responses, and there are different ways in which people respond. It's impossible for me to, but I think the screenings that I have personally valued the most are where you have a group of people working on a specific aspect of disempowerment. Say, for example, architects working with portable night shelters, or lawyers who are working on the Beggary. The Beggary Act in India is this brutal thing which basically renders criminal any act of begging in particular areas, because there's a really sort of a violent regime of sanitation, like many cities, like in London, in Delhi also, where you try and maintain spatial hygiene by not allowing the homeless into particular areas. So you'd be arrested if you're found begging at particular points. So lawyers who are working on it, and my meeting with Sushruth, for example, was, so I generally tend to not burden a film with the question of what does the film do, but I'm interested in these. The film always triggers different kinds of micro gestures or micro moments. So some of them are the sorts that I mentioned, with urban planners, with lawyers, with policymakers, with members of the Delhi government, etc.
Well, it's an extremely sensitive film in terms of how it deals with this absolute precarity. So I think I'd be interested to hear from our other panelists in terms of the film. One of the things that struck me about the film is how it really places us in particular locations in the city, in these very intimate locations. But how does the film resonate for you, Sushruth, in terms of the work that you do here? What's sort of striking for you about the particularities that it shows?
So many things that, to just keep it short, to open up the discussion with the audience over here, I think one of our struggles has been, my immediate response was how we might connect and bond with people, we call them patients, through sleep. Because that's not something that we bother about much in our clinical work, except for the fact that there's a continuous interaction which is hostile, often involving violence, trade-offs of various kinds with people who want to sleep, who want medications, who want sleeping tablets, and that's all they wish, and we are told that that's dangerous, that's not the good way. But the conditions to allow people to have a good night's sleep is something which is not part of our framework within mental health, for sure. I don't want to speak of the rest of biomedicine. And I think this made me rethink how we might need to understand, not just to connect each other across cultures through sleep, but also to be able to rethink our own theories about sleep and the role it plays in our wakeful life. And also I was deeply humbled by what Shaunak did, because when I met up with him, he said he spent 2 years at the place, and I have visited the site since then, and maybe we'll get to talk about more later on. So those are just my initial responses.
Thank you. Ian and Deborah, does that resonate with your experience as well?
Yeah, very much so. I was, when I go to bed tonight, I want peace and quiet. I want the film noisy. as though it was, yet another thing intruding in their ability to sleep. I think it was a film also that gave me a sense of chaos. When I talk about people in London who are sleeping, they also live in a world of chaos. And getting them out of that chaos, it can be quite difficult. But of course, the Russ sleeping problem in Delhi is a completely different scale to what we have here in London. I thought it was an amazing film. I hadn't seen it before, so glad I have now. Yeah, those are my initial thoughts.
Thanks, Ian. Deborah?
Yeah, it's such a powerful film. It's quite difficult to take it all in and quickly speak about it, but the statement that most came through for me was quite at the beginning of the film when he said, if you want to seize control of someone, never let them sleep. And for me, and I've worked at shelter nearly 20 years, homelessness is about utter powerlessness. And that's not just people that are sleeping on the street, and the people that visibly sleep on the street are really just the tip of the iceberg. Many people who sleep outside don't sleep on the street, they sleep in cars, they sleep on night buses, they're hidden away, they're sleeping in A&E departments, pretending they're waiting to see a doctor, railway stations and so on. But even people who are in hostels and the families that we work with in homeless bed and breakfast, it is that complete sense of powerlessness, of not knowing how long you're going to be there, not having any autonomy or control over your life. And I think the other thing that really struck me from the film, which strikes me a lot in the work that I do, is that we were shown the car park where there was room for the cars and a person was beaten if they tried to sleep there. And that happens quite a lot in housing generally, where more importance is given to the safety of a car than the safety of a person. So children can't play in some places because the cars might get damaged. And also just the fact that even in such a basic place, there was a TV. So we have all this amazing technology where we can see things from across the world, and yet we can't provide the most basic thing for human beings, which is to get a good night's sleep.
Thank you. I'm sure that people in the audience are going to have responses and reactions and questions. So please raise your hand if you do have a question. And just to let people know that the event's being recorded, so if you'd rather not be recorded, then just let the DocHouse, Bertha DocHouse staff know at the end. Okay, there's a question here.
Hi. So in all the spaces in the cinema and in the shelters, we only really saw men, and I'm just wondering where the women go at night, and if it's all kind of very deliberately separate.
Right, so thanks for that. Usually I, by the way of a disclaimer, talk about this aspect. Today I didn't. So when we started, the film was actually divided into 3 chapters. One was the Iron Bridge, the other was Meena Bazaar, and the third was this one particular women's night shelter in central Delhi. Now, as we started shooting, we realized that we couldn't shoot post 10 p.m. and rightly so, like men aren't allowed in. So I had 2 friends of mine shoot, but over time I realized that I was getting consigned to only being a footage reviewer. I wasn't really being able to direct, and it was just over time not feasible. So the plan is that we will make a volume 2 of Cities of Sleep that will intently focus on that one particular women's night shelter. Also, you will see that there's barely any presence of the transgendered or the differently abled, both of which form fairly thick clusters of population in Meena Bazaar especially. There is a fairly large chunk of the differently abled who live together, and the transgendered. And I didn't only want to do a kind of customary box tick to just put them in, because these are all units of experience that demand a whole film unto themselves, because they're really complex ecosystems. So the idea is that we will make a volume 2 of Cities of Sleep where we'll focus exclusively on this.
Can I ask our other panelists, how does the gender politics and politics of difference play out in homelessness in the context that you work, and does that kind of inform the policy making in the way that it should?
I work with people on the street, as you quite rightly said. There's a lot more that are homeless than just the rough sleepers that are visible. But women comprise roughly around about 10% of the rough sleepers on the streets. A lot of the women that do end up on the streets, for various reasons, are far more chaotic than the average. One of the things that has been set up in London, which I'm very pleased about, is Pan London working with women. Because a lot of the women who are rough sleeping do move around from borough to borough. And while outreach services are generally, practically exclusively funded just to work with women in one borough, that's not very useful when you have a woman wandering around the city. So that's one development that's taken place. We also see in certain areas where some women are sex working or being coerced into sex work, police activity can move them on. Just when support services are getting to know them and build up trust. So there's a lot of work to do, especially around enforcement, to try and knit the two things together.
Yeah, it's one of the things that struck me as well. But often I think when people in their mind's eye think of street homeless people in London or in England, it's probably a white man that tends to come to mind. And it was touched on in your film, but certainly in London and other cities in the UK and actually places that are a bit out of the way, not in urban areas, it is the threat of violence that is the most serious threat, far more than cold or anything else. And I'm sure people are fully aware of some of the deaths that have happened to street homeless people over the last few years. And obviously, if you're a woman, or if you're a BME person, or refugees as well, who feel they'll get extra aggression towards them because they're immigrants, they really won't want to sleep anywhere that's visible. I've known refugee women who have sleeping up in phone boxes all night. People will go to parks in outer London. But I think the other thing to say is that a lot of street homeless men do have children, but the children more often than not end up with the women. So you have lots and lots of homeless women with children, and although they might not be on the street, we do regularly see families with children sleeping in cars and derelict buildings. I think people think that there aren't children sleeping rough in this country, and there definitely are. But you do have more rights if you have children with you, but it doesn't necessarily mean you're much better off because you'll be in one room of a bed and breakfast hotel, getting very little sleep indeed.
Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, I was just going to say that it's interactional. It's about various genders interacting to produce a local ecology that would heal. So as you go out and walk around the way, you would see that women have to deal with their bodies and sell them in order to ensure protection, privacy, as well as sleep. So that's one part of it. But the other part of it is coming back to Shaunak's film. When I visited, one of the things that Shaunak, which occurred to me when we went to one of the sleep shelters for women, is that the women had terrible experiences in the night when they had to go to the toilet, to the bathroom, which was outside the place where they slept, and it was a separate bathroom. And very many of them said that there was a ghost there, and there was a spirit, and quite a few of them would experience the spirit. But as we unpacked the story, we found that there was a well on the way to the bathroom, and that well had a myth around it. It was about people who resisted and fought against the British during the period of the partition when people were being killed. And many women, too, in order to save their honor, jumped into that well. So the myth around that place was that the spirits of these women were around. and some of the women felt that they were under the influence, or the spirits who, as malevolent entities, would capture them and take over them. And so at once it opens up the world of how history matters, and how what happens in the past has had an influence on their current suffering, their sleep, their daily activities, their sense of what is a taboo, and crossing boundaries. So it's just to add on to what you were saying about in a sense of what gender is and where does gender lie here, but it just struck me that these were all women who were abused, terribly so, staying in a women's only shelter, but couldn't feel safe going to the bathroom 10 feet away because there were ghosts around. So it opens up the idea of the voices from the past, and how do these voices shape our everyday life, but more particularly our sleep.
Thanks. There's a question at the back here. Sorry, wait for the microphone, please. Because we're short of time, I think we're going to take 3 questions. So put your hand up if you have one.
I had 2 questions, but then you can choose. I'm curious to know, the Delhi government has been making a lot of claims that it has done, opened up a lot of rain in Basera. So when you showed it to them, what was their reaction of this? And the second is, as researchers, a lot of us face the dilemma. There's a line where he says, "You keep shooting me, but what do you really do for me?" So what does one do? We are collecting data, we're sharing it with each other, but it is what happened to his life. So I don't know. How do you deal with that?
Okay, thank you. Sorry, who? Put your hands back up, please. Oh, there's another one here at the back.
That was a terrific film. Thank you very much indeed. Just following up perhaps on the last question, I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit about the context of the precariousness of the space. And there was clearly an eviction, and we come back and the place has been cleared. And so what's the wider context of these spaces, this government land which is taken over, how it comes to be controlled? Because these are also entrepreneurial activities of people running these sleep businesses, which is really striking and quite different from what we would have here. And the sheer mass and collectivity of it is a sleeplessness. Homelessness is a collective experience, and I imagine that's quite different from the very dispersed nature of homelessness in London. Those are very striking things to me.
Yeah.
Would you like to respond now? I'll take
Maybe
one
we
more.
can take one.
Okay, can we take one more, please? Okay. Yeah.
Thank you, that was fascinating. I was just intrigued by the sort of clips of the animals that you had. And is there something about how animals sleep in these cities?
Should we take more?
No, I think you should respond.
I'll start with the second question first. So the scales are, 2 days ago, Sushrit and I had gone for a walk with Ian's team around the King's Cross area to just get a sense of the economies here. And these are different universes in terms of scale, like entirely different regimes of being. So the places in Delhi, like you correctly said, there's a very heavy entrepreneurial spirit to it. At one point of time, Jamal also says that I think what we provide is a kind of social necessity. And I'm completely at his side on this. Now, to begin with, just to give you a few numbers, currently there are, apparently there are around 3 to 4.7 million homeless in Delhi. Yeah, and this number keeps vacillating between official to unofficial counts, but that's work with that as a kind of base. On last count, I remember there being about 281 night shelters, each of which could house about 50 to 70 people. So the government can clearly only house an infinitesimal fraction of the total number of homeless. Now, given the kind of deficit there is, of course, individual entrepreneurial spirit has to rush in. So Meena Bazaar, for example, if you go there during the day, it's a really bustling, typical sort of old Delhi market that I'm sure many of us would have encountered. During the night, the entire area of the market and the parking lot adjoining it gets converted into this mammoth sleeping area. So if you walked in at about 1 a.m. on the 3rd of December, you would see an ocean of bodies that are heaving up and down. Like that's literally the first image that you confront. Jamal is the guy who also owns most of the cot beds around there. He's also the person who's now started producing the blankets. So there's a whole political economy to the system, of course. This is largely public land. In the end, when you realize that, also you realize through, especially through the experience of Meena Bazaar, that the city is fundamentally a shape-shifting monster. It's a beast that keeps shape-shifting. So even Shakeel, when he initially decides that he's not going to sleep at Jamal's, so there's a storm that happens and there's this guy who gets wet and falls extremely sick and an ambulance is to come and take him away, and Shakeel decides that he will not sleep there anymore, and he decides to go to all the earlier haunts that he used to sleep in, like the parking lot, like a subway, etc. But all of them are either under construction, something has gotten... So the city is constantly in a very violent kind of a churning. So these pockets of intimacies keep getting dismantled and re-inaugurated. So that area, what happened was that there was a huge fight with the cops. I wasn't there present physically that day, but I heard that. So there was this rape in this area called Daryaganj of this tourist, and it was rumored that the people involved in that rape case were sleeping in Jamal's area. So the cops had come to take the guy away. But you don't just walk in to Jamal's area and take somebody away. So the city. A different city emerges at night, right? So it has its own maps, it has its own new kinds of cartography. It also has its own new power centers. And Jamal pretty much is a kind of a alternate system of justice, of power dispensation, etc. So the cops can't just walk in, like saunter in and take people away. So there was some kind of a skirmish, and ultimately more police forces were called and they prevailed and the area was removed. Till today, what you saw in the film was 3 years ago. So till today, that area is completely evacuated. You can't sleep there anymore. The spatial economy of Lohapul, the iron bridge, is completely different. So you have a two-tier bridge. Underneath is a thin strip of land with the river flanking on either sides. Ranjeet himself, the guy who leads the iron bridge area, used to be a rickshaw puller. And he told me that he once noticed that he would get sleep only in 2 places. One was when he would burrow in the crevices of the bridge because of the tunnel effect of the river, there'd be a cold gush of wind. Or when he would go to the cheap movie halls. And he would say that it's only in the cinema that it's cool and you almost get nestled into a really nice sleep. You never get in nightmares when you're sleeping because the acoustic of the visual seems to sort of intersperse with your... He also has this line where he says, you can't tell what is a dream and what is the movie. So he tried to fuse the two concepts and tried to create a kind of a autonomous sleepers commune, and it really, that really is the idea there. It started off with him just putting a TV set there and asking people to come and watch. There's a sign in the middle which says that the time is there rationed on the basis of either 7 hours of sleep or 2 films, and you pay the same amount. So, and you realize that actually Ranjeet has been able to mobilize sleep as a kind of a really enabling adhesive between people. So over time what he did was he opened the sleepers bank account. So he pulled in money from people, and if somebody was falling sick, then they would call the medical services, dip into that pool. Similarly, he got a electricity meter installed there, which was again on the name of the sleepers. So this kind of identity building happened where sleep became the kind of main enabling community building adhesive between them, and forms of kinship. So if somebody falls sick, it doesn't matter if I don't know the name of the person next to me. I know that he sleeps here, and that alone is enough reason. There's also this line in the film where that guy who gets taken away by the ambulance is being told by other people that as long as you sleep here, we won't let you die. So, and Ranjeet really is able to tap into that. And I think it's actually the Iron Bridge which presents a more novel kind of way in which the people themselves, the community themselves are trying to figure out. So if the film essentially is about the parallel journey of two regimes around sleep, one being Meena Bazaar, which is a slightly coercive, slightly mafioso system, and the other is Lohapul, the Iron Bridge. At the end, one of them dies out because they're evacuated. On the other hand, the other community, the Iron Bridge, survives, and they say that as long as you're sleeping together, we will survive. That's the last thing we hear. So clearly, the spatial economics, the fact that it's hidden from the city. There's also this line where you can see the bridge on top, the subterranean space in the middle where they sleep, and the river underneath. And he says that it's literally like we're in this liminal space between, because the Iron Bridge is also a very popular suicide spot, which the sleepers themselves have now prevented, to the extent that Ranjeet instructed people, all the sleepers who would burrow into the crevices of the bridge and sleep, to say that when you're sleeping at night, whenever you hear a loud splash, like a psh of somebody falling into water, just immediately jump down and save people. So these are the various ways, and of course this helps the cops, So the cops would say that you prevent crime and you prevent the suicide rates going up in this area, and we are fine. So these are different ways in which one particular precinct negotiates with the authorities, and it over time accretes into different forms of enabling power systems.
Thanks very much, Shanak. Can I just...
What do you do next? What happens next?
Because we're running out of time, Sushrit, unfortunately we don't have any more time for questions. I'm sure people really want to hear you talking in more detail about the film and the locations, but I just want to give our panelists a chance to say if there are any sort of in terms of positive projects that are happening that you know about in terms of creating spaces for sleep. Would you like to sort of respond to what Shaunak's been talking about there in terms of spaces that kind of enable kinship in the way that the film shows?
I'll answer a slightly different question.
One of the things, quickly, I don't know, because we've only got a couple of minutes.
One of the things that's having the biggest effect, I believe, on reduction of rough sleeping is an attitude where we need to prevent it happening in the first place. That's been tried and tested. I understand Wales, last year, the year before, had fewer homeless applications than the number of Lambeth. And that's because the Welsh Government has been looking very, very closely at how do we prevent people coming onto the streets and keeping them at home so they can sleep.
Thanks very much, Ian. Deborah, very pithy.
Well, just to touch on what you said, I think community is really, really important, and I don't think it's just about having a roof over your head. I've known a number of people who've slept on the streets who, if they're offered accommodation, a bed sit, way in an isolated place where they don't know anybody, and they feel very bleak and isolated, that they actually sometimes come back to sleeping on the street because it is that camaraderie. And there absolutely have been places where people have slept together. Lincoln's Inn Fields, Waterloo, those places tend to get cleaned up, or that's the way the authorities would put it, very quickly. These days, so it's quite hard for people to sleep in community, but obviously that's how they feel safer, and everybody wants to live in a community where they feel looked after. But in terms of innovative projects, then absolutely prevention is very important. Unfortunately, at the moment, because of welfare reforms, we're seeing more and more people unable to pay for their accommodation, and actually there's a lot of enterprise going on in terms of landlords carving up properties, beds in sheds. We might call that exploitative, but they provide somewhere for people to live, and I think this is the real tension we have. If people are living in extremely poor conditions, if we take steps to improve those conditions, we're causing homelessness if they don't have anywhere else to go. So there's a real tension there that we need to think about very carefully. And if you look back on some of those slum landlords like Peter Rackman, who would accommodate people who other landlords wouldn't accommodate, then who's a slum landlord and who's someone that's being enterprising and helping with problems of homelessness. But in terms of innovative things, I don't think we should be looking for anything innovative in terms of origami sleeping shelters or anything like that. I think it's an absolute disgrace that we have so much inequality that we think, oh, you'll be okay on the street if you have a sort of cardboard shelter over you. It is about long-term accommodation that we'd all like to live in. None of us would like to sleep in a pod on the street, and that's what everybody wants. And London Borough of Lewisham have actually got temporary accommodation now for families, which is prefabricated. It only took a few months to put up, and it is absolutely amazing. In fact, they say that when other people have come and looked at it, they've said, why are you providing such good accommodation for homeless families when you could cut costs and not provide it so well? And I'm a critic. I look at everything with a critical eye, and I can't fault it. They're giving people 2-year tenancies until they can move on. So it's in Ladywell near the station. I'd strongly advise you to go and take a look at that, because prefab housing is really, really good quality now, actually better sound and weatherproof insulated than a lot of brick-built housing.
Thanks very much. Sushrit, do you want to finish by saying how you intend this kind of conversation to carry on? Because you initiated this project and you raised this issue of the shared histories. What's next for this project?
I'll give the last call to Shaunak, but I just want to say that, and I've said it before, that my discipline, which is psychiatry, is intellectually bankrupt. We treat sleep with medications. We have no new ideas, so I hope you'll join us for the wine reception of how we might do, what can we do to expand the idea that sleep, not just through a biomedical lens, but a more social and political lens, can help us understand why is it that we don't let each other sleep. And I'll stop there.
Thank you. And Shaunak, very briefly, what's next for you in the film?
I can just quickly say what happened after the film with Sushrit in terms of, I was earlier mentioning that it's these micro gestures that actually help in, because I don't think it's fair to burden a film in terms of, a film will not solve homelessness, obviously. It's only these kinds of micro gestures that can help. So Sushrit saw the film because of a common friend who's here, and came down to Delhi to visit the Iron Bridge. While we were interviewing and meeting people there, and Sushrit was chatting with like loads of people there, it turned out that a number of people can't sleep between the months of November to February. And the reason for that is that most people are dependent upon the river water to bathe. And obviously around that time the river water is really cold, so they can't avail it then. And as a result, they get a whole panoply of different kinds of skin ailments. One which is called chid, which means body lice, like something like that, which causes a huge amount of itching, and because of which a lot of them can't sleep at night, which can go a great deal in actually becoming fairly traumatic. So offhandedly, Sushrit mentioned to me that, have you considered a water heating device? And it always takes a perspective from outside to come in with this sort of and I really hadn't. I'd been going there for years now and I hadn't. So I showed the film to this solar energy enterprise in Bangalore called Selco, who saw the film, came down to the Iron Bridge and decided to install 2 solar water heaters, which immediately goes a long way in helping. They also realized that a number of rickshaws there were being converted by the government to becoming e-rickshaws. So they also now are working on a project where they're going to fit solar batteries on the rickshaw. So it's these kinds of tiny things that I think go a great deal in helping.
Okay, thank you very much. And I know that people would probably like the conversation to continue, and luckily we can do that in the reception, but in a slightly less formal way. So before we do that, can I just mention that on your seats you should have found some details of some upcoming Urban Lab film screenings. So we're screening the Norwegian film Oslo as part of the London Festival of Architecture, and also a film called Vertical Horizons by one of our artists in residence. And we also at UCL have an India Voices season at the moment. So we have a week-long series of events on Lavani dance coming up. So do check out all of those things. I'd also like to say thank you very, very much to those who we've collaborated with to put on the screening tonight, particularly Sushrit for initiating the project, and Shaunuk for coming and presenting the film, and Ian and Deborah for being on the panel as well. It's a really fantastic and powerful film, and thank you very, very much to Bertha DocHouse as well for being so encouraging about putting it on, and particularly to Jess and Jenny and to Chloe, and also thank you to Jordan Rowe from the Urban Lab. So please join me in thanking our speakers and the director, and we'll get started.